Thank you all for participating in our polls, for being part of today's conversation. I'm really excited to start off an exciting panel today. Welcome to Portland for All's Policy Talks. My name is Andres. I use he and they pronouns, and I am the board chair for Portland for All. We're all volunteer run, C4 nonprofit, and started out of conversations that folks were having with friends and neighbors concerned about the challenges facing our city and all of the negative rhetoric around this place that we call home. So we're united in our belief that there is a hopeful, positive, and inclusive future that's possible for the city, and that will take all of us coming together and working to make it a reality. We know for some folks, this might be your first event with Portland for All. Thank you, welcome, glad to have you here. To briefly share a little bit about what we do, we have 4 key programs as an organization. We hold community conversations as town halls that are planned by teams of neighborhood volunteers to help us hear directly from people across Portland about the challenges that they see facing the city and the ideas that they have to address them. Then we have our monthly meetups, which alternate in locations around town, and they're an opportunity for new volunteers looking to get involved to connect with folks who are leading our programming. This gives people one-on-one and group interactions and the ability to step into this movement as a volunteer-run organization. Policy Talks, that's what we're doing here. We hold these monthly to educate ourselves and our community by bringing together panels of experts who are doing the work to address the critical challenges facing Portland. So through these, you'll have a chance to hear from some of our best and brightest about the challenges that we face and what programs and policies actually address the root causes of those issues. And then last, Portland for All is a 501c4, which means we're able to do political activity and endorse candidates to promote leaders who are best equipped and committed to addressing the major challenges facing our city. We know that politics can feel divisive and turn some people off, but we also know that elected officials have a lot of power and the ability to make critical decisions that shape the world we live in. So we're in the process right now of issuing our endorsements for the May Multnomah County elections. You'll be able to check those out soon on our website and stay posted as we get ready for our endorsement process for the November elections. All of our work is led by volunteers. So if this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, you're welcome to come to our next monthly meetup. We'll be sending out an email about that. And it's a chance to connect with other volunteers and learn how you can get involved. We'll send out regular opportunities by email and social media. We are volunteer run, and so we run on donations. If today's conversation and our programming to you is interesting, please consider supporting our work with a contribution that's meaningful for you. So now I'm excited to stop talking and turn it over to tonight's excellent panel. During the events, you were able to submit questions that you'd like to ask the panelists. And so I encourage you throughout the event, as you have a question that comes up, put it in. And at the end, we'll have a chance to ask and go through some of those questions with our panel. So now it's time to introduce our panelists. Ashton Simpson, Jonathan Moz, and Steph Routh are all incredible. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are and what brought them to this work. So we can start with you, Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Andres, and thank you so much for having me here. My name is Ashton Simpson. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Metro Councilor representing the good folks out in District 1. And those boundaries include Fairview, Troutdale, Fairview, Wood Village, East Portland, and unincorporated aspects of Clackamas County, and a small sliver of Westland. So happy to be here. Happy Valley. So happy to be here with you all. Lifelong Houstonian, veteran, born and raised in Houston, went off into the military, did some civil engineering training and site development, moved on here, went to school at PSU for community development because I cared about people. I cared about where we were going as a society, and I wanted to understand how to shape that because I understood infrastructure. Really rooted down in East Portland. I call it home. This is the most beautiful place in all of the Portland metro area if I had to pick. And honestly, I'm concerned about a lot that I see in our community, but we'll talk about that later. And I'm just happy to be here tonight. So thank you, Andres.
So much for being here, Ashton. Steph, would you like to go next?
Well, thank you, Andres, and everyone for having me. And thanks to everyone who is joining us this evening. There's a lot of things that you could be doing, including, being out in this sun. So really grateful. I grew up in East Portland, and I grew up on a street without sidewalks, and was a toddler when annexation happened. So I remember a lot of promises made to East Portland that shall be kept in the new administration. And it was, but I did notice over the course of growing up, and then certainly living now, growing up in Park Rose, now live in Lentz, that a lot of the transportation investments historically made to East Portland in particular make it a convenient place to drive through, not a particularly nourishing place to walk, bike, or access transit in. And we see that the impacts of that in our traffic fatalities, in a high rate of high crash corridors in this area. And seeing that, it took me a long time to realize actually that we could actually do something about it, that God did not create our roads, in fact, and that we can make different choices. And so I got to be Ashton's, Councilor Simpson's warm-up act as the first executive director of Oregon Walks, and I'm now a fan, and really excited for this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steph. And Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for the invite and for having me, Andres, and everybody else. Good to be here. Excuse me. I moved to Portland 20 years ago, grew up in Southern California, East Los Angeles area, and moved up here with a young daughter and my wife in 2004. And pretty quickly wanted to do something to kind of put all my bike-oriented self toward, and I was really inspired by what I saw here on the street, just in terms of the culture around bicycling in Portland. Really blew me away. And I'd always been sort of a pretty internet focused person in terms of my professional stuff, starting to getting into marketing and blogs and all that stuff in the early days. So one thing led to another, and I started to pour myself into just documenting the community that I saw all around me and wanted to share with everybody, even people outside of Portland, but also wanted to help make the community I was seeing stronger by getting everybody to kind of connect and see what was happening. So that started Bike Portland. I've been doing it every day since about April 2005. So in my 19th year here, and hoping to get to the 20th year in one piece, mentally and financially and all the other things. One of the roles that I've taken, most seriously, and I think has just been a really big part of Bike Portland over the years, has unfortunately been dealing with serious crashes and fatalities on our roads, and this topic of safe streets and really unsafe streets. I've met way too many family members. I've just been to way too many memorials. I've actually been to way too many emergency press conferences to do something about it. Seems like those happen every few years. So I'm generally pretty frustrated about our lack of progress in this area. So eager to chat more about that with these great folks here today.
Thank you so much. Really excited for today's conversation. For folks who are just joining, my name is Andres. I use he, they pronouns. I'm the board chair at Portland for All and helping facilitate this great group of folks. So the first question we're going to start with is, what do you see as the key problems facing the Portland Metro when it comes to safe streets and multiple transportation options? And what should we be keeping in mind? So let's start with Steph for this one.
These are all big questions already. So, I think in a way we are pushing against history. And a lot of I mentioned the historic investments. We recognize that the climate crisis is real and that 40% of greenhouse gas emissions derive from our transportation sector. We talk about the urgency and the need for a just transition, But at the federal and the state levels, we are still overwhelmingly funding driving infrastructure. And this has been the case, for decades. It started, that we used to have, what was it, an 80-20 split, that the federal government in the time of Robert Moses, that local governments could front 20% of a huge highway project, and the federal government would front 80%. We still are seeing, even though we know that we need to be moving to a just transition, we need to be moving to a multimodal transportation system because of 40%, because so much of our greenhouse gas emissions derive from the transportation sector, and yet we're not doing it. We're not doing it at the federal and the state level, and therefore at the local level, that is a lot to push against. So that's one. And I also think, and to the note that a lot of people, and thank you for doing those polling questions about whether we feel more or less safe than we did before the pandemic. The pandemic interrupted and shifted a lot of our behaviors. It also, I think we have seen a huge rise in addiction. We talk about the addiction crisis. And all of these are interlocking, like, right, 2021 and 2022, we saw a significant rise throughout the state of single car collisions and single car fatalities. And a lot of that was attributable to addiction. So I think that there's some in terms of infrastructure. How do we push back against federal and state funding, and really advocate for a multimodal investments that can move us forward? And how do we look at what the pandemic has done and how we need to look at the climate crisis, the addiction crisis, the housing crisis, and how we kind of lift everything up? It was a long answer. Okay.
It's a good answer. Thank you, Steph. Jonathan, we'll go next to you to understand what you see as the key problems facing the region when it comes to safe streets and transportation options.
I think the key problems really, there's just too many cars on the street. I think we're overwhelmed with how much driving is being done. I mean, I look at transportation as the choice we make, in terms of which mode is really a competition, right? So I think, unfortunately, in Portland, the sort of main problem we see in this topic is that driving just competes too well. It's too easy to drive. And that just on its face wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but it just so happens that driving comes with, a lot of negative externalities and consequences, for everybody who's not in a car. So, in my work, I see constantly messages from people and hear about experiences and see things where it's clear to me that, a lot of Portlanders feel like they're hostage in their own home or their own block because they're just afraid of the presence of these cars driving through their neighborhoods and stuff. So I just think that's not great. There's too many people that don't feel safe experiencing our city outside of a car. So we're really just not reaching our potential if we can't get more people to, make the choice to bike, walk, and take transit. So I think, unfortunately, in Portland, because, just politically and culturally, people are so averse to conflict sometimes that we have been too afraid to really be strong about making driving less attractive, right? And really tipping that balance of the competition and encouraging people to do it less. There's always been this notion that we could just keep building bike lanes and making buses incrementally better, and that somehow people would just make the switch. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen anymore. We've really gotten all of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and done the easy stuff. And I think it's time to start having conversations and learning how to change the narrative toward being more aggressive to making driving less fun, less convenient, more expensive, all that sort of stuff. I just keep coming back to that. And it's also a fact, increasingly so, as folks know with the pandemic, that for far too many folks that are driving, they're doing it without regard for other people. As Steph mentioned, the crises that people are experiencing in other parts of their lives. And I also think the political divisiveness that we're all suffering from as a country bleeds into the streets. Absolutely. I just think we have to get stronger with how we talk about the choice between getting in a car and doing other things, and not be afraid to be more aggressive about making driving less convenient. So I think that's really the number one thing. And we should keep in mind how to, as a city, start to be able to have those kind of conversations in a productive way.
Thank you, Jonathan, and for helping us understand the conversation as choices. Ashton, what do you see as the key problems facing the region when it comes to this topic?
Absolutely. No, I appreciate and uplift actually both the comments from both Steph and Jonathan. And I'll add this piece too. I mean, we said the Portland metro area, so we're talking like the entire region. And so from my vantage point, what I also see is everybody has a competing interest. And so if everybody, all the jurisdictions are fighting for this project and that project, and we're not telling a cohesive story around like what's the importance of these projects and why we need them to keep folks safe or to get folks to and from the things that make their lives or uplift their lives in a way that's positive. And to Jonathan's point, I think, when you talk about a community like East Portland or communities in East County that have long, as Steph described, been out of the conversation around infrastructure and around funding and what those dollars look like. I think it's also going to take political will. I'll be the first one to throw it out there. Like, if you know me, you know me. I'm always like East Portland, East County, because I understand, I see it on a daily basis. The devastation that's happening on these streets because folks are driving erratically. I mean, it's something, and it is telling. I love to tell experiences. I love to share mine. But my son, he became Jonathan, you love this. He became a citizen journalist one night because we were riding home, coming home from Gresham. And there was an auto accident from a car driving, and he recorded we were seconds away from being caught in it. And he was baffled. He was like, well, Dad, isn't the speed limit 35? I'm like, well, Bear, that's part of the problem is, the roadway can say one thing, but it's designed and built to do something else. It's designed to be very wide. It's designed to be fast. And I think that is also the problem I see is, in our engineering, right? Like we have to get out of this antiquated thinking that automobiles is the most efficient way to move people. That is not. It is not. It is investing in public transit. It is investing in public right of way. It is making sure that people have access to those things. And so that's the problems I see in our system. But also I'm glad to see folks on this call, on this panel with me that cares passionately about it. And yes, Steph set the prototype. She said it. As the Oregon Walks' first executive director, she set the model and set the standard for us to go out and advocate. And sure enough, that has carried on over through many facets in our community. So thank you, Steph, for that.
Thank you, Ashton, and thank you for highlighting how some of these decisions are structural, right? They're decisions about how our communities are shaped and designed. So next, I'm going to go to a question about street safety. I also saw a similar question came in the QA. So as a reminder to folks, you're welcome to add questions to the Q&A that you'd like to see us ask the panelists later. This question is around how we get to street safety. So despite having initiatives like Vision Zero and other commitments that are intended to reduce traffic fatalities, we continue to see people killed in our streets. So what specific programs and policies help us get at the root of the problem? And we'll start with Jonathan for this question.
Yeah, thanks. I keep coming back to the idea that, the desperate times that a lot of people are experiencing right now in terms of the overlapping crises of, economic strife, or people stressed out about whatever thing they're seeing on the internet, or even people stressed about climate change or the things they're seeing on the street, whatever, that really does spill over into how people are driving and how people are acting on the road. So I think it's really important, if we want to get to a better place, to restore some of that hope. And I know that probably sounds cheesy, but we need things like a functioning city government that's capable of implementing things, so that regular Portlanders feel that there's a reason for them to be capable and be good at, driving and how they treat other people. But unfortunately, folks are looking at their leadership and not seeing great models. So they're not then leaders in their own neighborhood. Like, Peabody had a safety campaign once called like, set the pace, right? So if you're driving 20 in your neighborhood, or I think 20 is too fast, I think 15 is much safer speed. So, set the pace, drive 15. So we need people in positions of power and high profile folks to sort of help inspire some of that, specifically, show people how to be a responsible user of the street. I think another thing I would definitely say is, I'm a fan of automated enforcement. I think we could do as much of that as I think we could do a lot more of that. Obviously there's some pitfalls there. I think it comes down to trusting the people who are doing the programs. And I think in Portland, we are lucky to have not just a transportation agency, but people around it, folks like Steph and Ashton, who I do trust to do programs like that in a way that would be just and fair. And there's a lot of stuff we could do with automated enforcement. If people aren't quite ready to start, behaving the right way to others on the road, well, then they can have a threat of, some kind of financial consequence or something with their driving privileges. I think that's really important. But I mean, basically, I'd also go back to my previous answer a bit in terms of, I think the more we can do to limit exposure to driving, the better, right? So in every policy and program, if we can just get people to spend less time in cars, we're winning and we're pushing to a better place. So, in that note, we had a bunch of really good pricing related ideas, right? So making it so that people would pay a fee to go downtown, or certain zones downtown would have higher pricing or much higher tech and dynamic parking pricing policies. But those have just sat on a shelf for years. Nobody at City Hall wants to pick that up and really make some hay with it and actually get it implemented. So we need a government that can be capable and responsible on these issues and implement stuff like those pricing policies that were passed by the city years ago. They need to dust those off and to really put those into action.
Thank you, Jonathan, and highlighting the importance of having strong leadership who really is willing to take a stand on these issues. Ashton, we'll go next to you on which specific programs and policies help us get at the root of this street safety problem.
Absolutely. No, well, first I want to uplift that photo enforcement piece, but also I want to say that there are holes because we have folks with ghost cars or no license plates, and folks who do try to figure out where those flashing light cameras are, those enforcement cameras are, and they know when to slow down and when to speed back up. So we know that there's holes. However, it's a step in the right direction. And honestly, I think that it goes back for me to design. How are we making age-friendly communities where folks like our elders and our kids and folks who have disabilities, who live life with a disability. I'm myself a disabled veteran, so I do know it's hard to get around sometimes, but also how are we focusing in on ADA design? I mean, we all understood and know what happened with the Creek settlement, but also like we continue to see that communities like in the West Hills and then out in East County, like there is still, impediments in the sidewalk. There's still, outdated curb ramps. There's still a lot of work to be done. But until we get there, like I think the big portion for me, particularly on our high crash corridors, is around design, right? Like how are we calming traffic? How are we adding elements, one, to keep pedestrians not only safe, but cool from the heat? We need to start talking about street trees and other aspects that keep folks safe, not just from automobiles, but from the elements. I'll stop there because I know Steph has probably got like all of the rest of the answers and I don't want to take them all. But I think that, there are other ways. These are some of the ways we can do this. And I know that we've all, even in our participants box here, we've all been working on this. We all have the big brains around this, and we all know that there's some type of solution that goes towards this. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ashton, for highlighting some of these structural design changes that we need. Steph, what would you add to this conversation?
I mean, the blessing and the curse of going right after these two is like, no notes. I would say kind of pulling back on the design of our streets, especially our high crash corridors, exactly as Ashton said, that And that isn't just for, we were talking about traffic safety, but that's also street safety, right? That the larger we had, if you look at the most recent interactive map of shootings over the last couple of years in Portland, you can see the collectors and you can see the arterials, like gun violence and high crash corridors. There is a correlation, and so we saw at the Arleta Triangle Arleta Square Triangle. I can't remember which geometric shape goes first, but we saw when the Mount Scott Arleta Neighborhood Association, right, worked on a placemaking of just kind of taking paint and a couple of a little bit of street furniture, that decreased also gun violence by up 60%, and that was an apples to apples comparison with other corridors in the same city. So I think that when we think of walkability, and when I say walkability, I also want to say rollability, because we say walkability, but that is also about making, as Ashton said, ADA access, and that it can be walkable and rollable. But walkable neighborhoods, it is that elegant solution to a lot of our challenges. You know, it is aging in community, it's safe routes to school, it's disability justice, it's small business economic development. You know, there's it's public health, that there's so many, it's connection and emergency preparedness, that people know each other's neighbors. And so there's a whole fabric that comes not just with the absence of fatalities, but it also sparks the presence and growth of community and interdependence. And they also conveniently, walkable neighborhoods create great nodes for transit, abundant, frequent transit access. And so I think it really does come back to, a lot of it is design and funding. And as Jonathan and Ashton both pointed out, you know, the enforcement, automated enforcement, recognizing that there are some trade-offs and some needs to really monitor to make sure that that is not further disadvantaging, particularly communities of color that have a long history of being overwhelmingly targeted through enforcement.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the interconnectedness between these different issues, both within transportation and then across different topics that people in our city are concerned about. So our next question is on multimodal transportation. Keeping on this theme of asking about specific programs and policies, what is needed to create reliable and viable transportation options for Portlanders? And we'll start with Ashton for this one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andres. Well, first, I think it's building on the work that we set forth, like the work that we all put in for HB 3014, the bike bus bill, right? Like, it's making sure that we fund things like that so kids can get to and from school, and we get cars out of the school zone. I think that another important piece is uplifting regional travel options that, you know, here at Metro, we have a whole department tailored for that. I feel like that whole department has some tie or connection back to the work that we're doing here, but it's important to lift that work up as well. And then I would also say, look at the work that's happening on 82nd Avenue and how we think about how we transform that and make that a place where more community can be a part of. And I think that's honestly, like, from, if I can just take a minute, that's the example we're trying to set, how we invest in transportation and transit options in communities that have been left out. 82nd Avenue is our example corridor, because we also have to remember too, there's other corridors too where multimodal options are not safe, like 122nd. I would never, ever, ever ride my bike down 122nd, because it is just that, it's that treacherous. And so I want us to really think about, like, what does it mean to have multimodal? What does that mean for communities, particularly out in East County, that, well, one, we know we have wide blocks, but then also, like, bike lanes are crappy. They're just a striped lane next to 5 lanes of fast traffic. So how are you going to stay safe? And I know that there are good projects that have gone in, like in the 150s bike loop. I'm gonna give a shout out to Timur Ender because he was the project manager on that, right? Like good folks in the community are seeing it through, but there are still some gaps. And so before I go out and just say multimodal options are gonna save us all, I'm gonna say this first: build the infrastructure first so that we can use it. Because let me tell you, one of the options that was never available was a set of sidewalks on Halsey from 122nd all the way through. And we got sidewalks on the north side of the street, not the south side, because there's some gaps. We'll talk about it at another time. However, before they pulled the plastic sheets off of that sidewalk, let me tell you, people have been walking on that since then. And that's what I mean. We have to start to produce, like in communities where a multimodal option isn't possible, we have to make it possible before we can start to advocate for them to go in there. And so that's where I'm at on that.
Thank you so much, Ashton, and for highlighting some really good examples of work that models how we should be doing this. So next, we'll go to Steph. Same question. What programs and policies are needed to create that viable transportation options?
I love coming after Ashton for this one because we also have to believe it's possible and that like what we see is not all there is, and what we see does not have to be the future. I love that there is a relationship between science fiction and social justice, that it's like that we talk about, Afrofuturism as one example of like believing, creating a world that we wish to exist, and then, back planning. And so speaking of planning and speaking of 82nd, it's just such a great a great example because and this is where multimodal transportation, like transportation planning, hits in with land use. So I have the honor of serving and had the honor of serving for a brief time with Andres on the Planning and Sustainability Commission. And so another question is like, how do we ensure when something does move like 82nd Avenue to local control? How do we have a conversation about like what is the future life of this corridor? Right now, it's a lot of auto sales and it's a lot of public storage, but we also know that it is the #1 host of the most used bus route in the TriMet system. And you wouldn't know that from looking at the land use, on either side of like, East Side auto sales and public storage. Like that's pretty much what it is for a good chunk until you hit McDaniel High School. And so how can we reimagine and redesign that land use so that it is welcoming, that it does have destinations, that it is a walkable uh, destination for transit? I'm cautiously optimistic, emphasis on the caution and emphasis on the optimism for the East Portland, for the TIF districts that they're talking about. They're talking about 3 different tax increment finance districts: 82nd Avenue, east of 205, around like Division Midway and including Rosewood, and the Park Rose Gateway area. And it's like, what can we learn from past urban renewal to ensure that that people who are living there can use that as a mechanism for self-determination, and that it doesn't, as so often happens, that we become stewards for our eventual displacers. But I'm excited about, what are the opportunities there. I also think just stepping back, that and recognizing that 1 in 4 Oregonians can't or don't drive. Too young, ability, disability, like that there's a lot of reasons that go into it, but 25% of our state's residents cannot drive or do not drive. And are we spending 25% of our transportation dollars on multimodal transportation currently? The answer is no. We can start anytime. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you for highlighting that the difference between how we spend dollars and how folks get around. Jonathan, same question as the other folks, and then we'll have a quick follow-up for Ashton or Steph, if you could explain a little bit about what's happening on 82nd Avenue. But first, Jonathan, what programs and policies are needed?
Yeah, well, both Steph and Ashton talked a little bit about East Portland, and I think that's one of the biggest problems, I think, for PBOT and for the city at large right now is the fact that, well, I know the bikeways and other multimodal infrastructure out there is not excellent all over the place. The city has actually invested quite a bit in recent years to make it better, right? Division, 162nd, the 130. There's a bunch of money coming to 122nd and off, as folks said, 82nd. So a lot of action to make the bike network. Oh, the city's also done a lot of neighborhood greenways work to crisscrossing some of these arterials. But the big problem is nobody's using them yet. There's very few people riding bikes in East Portland. And I say that not as a bike advocate saying it's a problem, it's a political problem for the city of Portland, because it is enraging the haters, and it is a huge, huge gap in terms of the story we're telling ourselves about Portland being this great city for alternative transportation, because people who aren't necessarily on that tip, they look out their window and they see this nice new bike lane and they don't see anybody on it, right? So when it comes to multimodal transportation, we have a system that is really good, that works, that is especially appealing to folks that live, east of 82nd. That's bike share. Bike Town is a good program. It's been working for years, but we're starving the system because we have a leadership, and too many people are too afraid to say that we need to put some more money behind it so that we can buy more bikes and expand the system, right? The city keeps expanding the service area, but they don't add any more bikes because everybody's afraid to put some general fund money toward it or some other money toward it, even though it's been, despite the fact that it's been very successful. So I think if we could blanket East Portland with a lot more Bike Town bikes so that folks could start feeling like they could get out and get on a bike and try some of these investments the city's made, that would really be helpful in a lot of ways. There's also been a stall in Rose Lane projects. I mean, where's our progress on bus lane projects and priority buses? That's not a difficult thing to do. That's just putting up signs and telling everybody about a service change. I noticed that we had some good progress on that for a few years, but then coming back to Portland city government, leadership changed and everything's just stalled. And now all I hear about Rose Lanes is that Commissioner Mapps wants to study one of them to see if it's effective, and there's just no progress on that. So we could do a much better job with doing bus priority immediately. And we should be doing that. It's a huge missed opportunity. So I also think it's important to really subsidize the behaviors that we want to encourage. And again, we have a successful program that's already doing that I think people should know about and it should grow, which is the city's transportation wallet program that they do, which is essentially giving people free and or highly reduced bus fare, Bike Town fare, and scooter fare if they trade in a parking permit application or choose not to drive or whatever. So that's a great program that can really get more people to try something besides driving. So I would just end by saying we do not lack really good ideas in this town. What we lack are the people that are able to get them implemented.
Can I add one to the wish list?
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
I forgot to mention it earlier, but Youth Pass all year for all schools. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No, I love
Andres,
the great list of ideas. Yeah, go for it.
may I add one more thing? Because I feel the hate Jonathan is talking about around I just want to say that because I don't know if you all remember Sunday Parkways and the gentleman who brandished the weapon at us because he was upset because we were in the neighborhood. And I think that is also some part of the attitude that we see out towards the fringe parts of the community.
No, thank you for highlighting the real challenges and barriers that people are facing. So we had a quick follow-up question. If someone could talk a little bit about what's happening on 82nd Avenue, and then we will go to our first audience question before our last prepared question.
Absolutely. I guess I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, back in 2021, Yeah, well, how long has it been? It's been a while now, but 82nd Avenue was transferred over to Peabody. Right now, we're in the process, and when I say we, Oregon Walks is leading a coalition, the 82nd Avenue Coalition, with neighbors, other nonprofits like Pano, Verde, who else am I? Unite Oregon, as well as the Montevilla Business Association and a few others. It's a robust roundtable, and they are working on trying to figure out what investments look like on 82nd Avenue, what the designs will look like. And if you want to get involved, you can check that out and sign up for updates at OregonWalks.org. I almost said .com. We're .org. And also on the Metro front, my two colleagues, Councilor Christine Lewis and Councilor Duncan Wong, are leading the 82nd Avenue transit study on the Metro side of things. And so they're looking at the entire corridor from Airport all the way down to Clackamas. So looking forward to that work. And just a real quick note for the group, I will be going on the JPAC trip here in May to talk a little bit about those projects to our federal delegation, and as well as anybody else who wants to hear about 82nd Avenue and the rest of East Portland. So that's my update on 82nd, Andres.
Thank you so much, Ashton. Steph or Jonathan, anything you want to add about the work happening around 82nd Avenue?
I'll add quickly that there is a debate, might be too hard of a word, but there is a lot of talk around how bicycles will be integrated into that project. There's a lot of talk about some great plans to improve the crossing of bicycles across 82nd. And there's a lot of talk about some alternative routes just to the side of 82nd for bikes to get north-south through that corridor. But there's just some really interesting conversations about, hey, we have this, really great opportunity. We're spending, I don't know, $80-100 million or something to change this street. How are we going to make sure that folks who want to ride a bicycle can do it in a way that's safe and efficient and convenient?
And just to thank you for that, both of you. And just to reiterate that there are 3 TIF districts. So 82nd Avenue has its own currently work group to identify like what exactly are the boundaries of that potential TIF district. And then going forward, I think some next questions are, how do these TIF districts relate to each other, and what does the governance model and oversight model look like? So that'll be really interesting.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you all for helping educate us about what's happening on 82nd. So first audience question we're going to add, how could we better integrate walking, biking, and transit networks so they're mutually supportive, convenient, and safe? So recognizing some of the barriers that exist in making those networks connected, or there's specific things we can be thinking of or doing to make those better integrated. To any of our panelists who would like to address it.
I can start. That's okay. Okay. I do think of walkable, rollable neighborhoods as an important kind of like the foundation, right? That you're creating this this walkable, rollable place, and then providing, and then access to transit is like the spine of those, destination to destination, node to node, and then I feel like cycling becomes then, I would like to think, inevitable and abundant. And I think of, I have mentioned this, actually, I mentioned this the last time Jonathan and I had a conversation, but like if we remember the bike lanes to nowhere that some folks talked about when the Holgate bike lane that went in some years ago. And I was fascinated at that time. It's like, everyone was like, there's no bikes riding down it, and I was like, oh, I'm riding down it. It's great. But also the fact that they called an entire part of town nowhere and no one blinked. And that is just our assumption. And so like, first of all, creating a somewhere and creating a place that is identified as a lovable, walkable place where people live, And then how do we ensure then that people can get to and from and within that area by any and all means? Take it, team.
All right. You saw how I chopped my way in there? All right. So I agree with that. And I think that a good tangible way for me to identify and do that is like, let's start by doing walk audits or walk shed audits, right? Like, let's start at schools, let's start at parks, let's start at grocery stores, let's start at farmers markets, and let's understand in a 1.5 to 2 mile radius around that site, what are the walking conditions? What's missing? What can we bring in? How can we, what routes exist? And then we build our way into projects that way. We talk about how we can connect people to transit through our collectors or through our main corridors, or we talk about how we connect folks to different nodes of development that exist, like, you know, particularly in East County. Like, what does that look like? How do we get folks access to that? And so I really love that answer. And I think too, like, we do these traffic counts. I always see these little black lines on the road doing the traffic counts. And I'm like, man, it'd be nice to see somebody with some orange vest on and some clipboards saying, no sidewalk on this block. All right. And keep it moving so that we can then itemize them and put them in, you know, organizing around the RTP that we know is coming up in 2028.
Okay, I'll put a fine point too on what Ashton was saying. Is very similar, but I would say for any advocates or community folks listening, activists, this stuff about integrating bike, walk, transit, I think often just falls out of the visibility, let's say, of the city planning agencies or the metros or the TriMets or whatever. Like, what I'm trying to say is they don't know everything. They don't know the conditions on the corner. They don't know that there's not a curb ramp by that bus stop, or that there's nowhere to park your bike over here. They need to be told that. I mean, ideally, yes, they would have some amazing system that they'd know everything. But in my experience, I have seen hundreds and hundreds of times where people like folks, you listening to this right now, know the email to email, or know the little hotline to leave a little tip on, or whatever it is, right? Agitate locally and let these agencies know that those connections aren't there. And a lot of times they're happy to hear it. All they do is it's somebody at a dispatch who punches into a little computer, and then they make a work order, and then they can go replace the sign for that bus stop that fell off that you didn't know. You're right. So there's a lot of little things like that we don't necessarily have to wait around for government to fix. That they all have hotlines. 823 Safe is a great system for the city. I know TriMet's got another one. Ask ODOT is something you can try to use, but they all want to hear from you on these fine-grained things to help these networks connect better.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for giving folks a tangible way to engage. So we have one more prepared question, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. Our last question is about communication. So transportation often gets framed as an us versus them conversation. How can we talk to our friends and families about safe streets and alternatives to driving in a way that brings us together instead of pitting folks against each other? So we'll start with Jonathan for this one first.
Oh boy, this is such a question for me. I spent all my life dealing with these arguments on a daily basis. You know, I'm to the point now where I feel like, and this may be controversial, but I feel like it's our reluctance to maybe get a little bit mad and confrontational that's causing us to not make progress on this stuff. I think sometimes it's appropriate to name and shame if we truly want to change culture. We did that with smoking. We've done that as a society in other ways. I mean, there are some people, and notice I use the word some. I think that's an important thing. I don't talk about drivers. I talk about some drivers, right? I think that using little words like that and being conscious of that can change a conversation. I try to always put the word in there, some, so people don't feel like I'm blanketing a whole, you know, stereotyping, that kind of thing. So I think, you know, we should not shy away from the fact that there are some drivers who are literally, you know, piloting a deadly weapon through our neighborhoods, and the choices that they're making are leading to terrible, terrible consequences. So we need to be okay with confronting that. And I think it's okay to name that for what it is, and if we have the opportunity to do so. I also think getting people to try different modes is really important to build perspective and empathy, right? So this is, again, where I think city leadership could help. I could it would be great, let's say, if City Hall had a week where each counselor committed to try a different mode for the week and then went on their social media and talked about it, how it expanded their perspective and helped them know what it was like to be in someone else's shoes. I think that's really important. I would also say when I hear people getting bristly about these things and these debates and the us versus them, I'll often just point to things like Sunday parkways, right? I'll say, okay, look, I know you don't like the stuff I'm talking about. You think I'm trying to come take your car from you, whatever, but let's just think of Sunday parkways. That is an example of the kind of city that folks like myself are trying to build. That's what we're working toward. All those wonderful people out enjoying their neighborhoods, being in parks together with family. How can you not, do you like that? Do you not like that? I mean, I think so many people can appreciate what Sunday Parkways is and what it's done. And I think it's an excellent example to remind folks that that's all we're talking about when we talk about bike projects or this other thing. We're trying to create conditions like that in more places more often. So I don't know, things like that. Good examples are things that you can bring up to maybe get the temperature down. But I could go on this topic forever, so I'm going to just quit right there.
I appreciate it, Jonathan, and I like that idea of focusing on like what is the thing we're trying to build towards, because people aren't opposed to that. And so really painting that picture of that world we're moving towards seems like an effective way to bring people together. Steph, we'll go next to you.
And I think that this is a question where all of us live, right, on our day-to-day. It's like, how do we shift this frame? I will say, I mean, that driving for so many is not currently a choice. Like it is not something that that can be avoided. Like we are in so many ways, and just the way we have, through displacement as one, and the sheer distance of people from where they can afford to live to where they have a job, that there are some real challenges here, and so the issue is, again, the system. The issue is, if we had a choice, we could have a different conversation. But I think that there's a lot of choice that people do not have. I get to bike most days. I'm a lifelong bike commuter. I've been without a car for 45 of my 48 years, and one thing that I like to do, because is every day on my commute, I have a personal, this is just very personal, I'll just share because it's fun. I try to see how many people I can make smile. Like when you smile at people, and I like, how many different modes did I get? Like when I can get someone walking with a stroller, another cyclist, someone on a bus, I get double points, like a couple of cars. That over the road truck driver, like definite bonus points, like that, because there also is this recognition, this stereotype that people who are cyclists are like angry and aggro, and so just to break that up, it's like at the end of the day, we're all trying to get where we want to go. And I think most people, like, I look at them, like when we're at a stoplight, and it's like, it doesn't seem like people are having a great time in traffic, that I have a feeling most people would like a living wage so that they didn't have to go to more than one job, so that they could spend more time. They could have more transportation choice with fewer jobs. They could spend more time with family members, and that we have to recognize that I think that not having transportation choice built in and having such long commutes built into what our current environment is, it is stealing time. Even like beyond the fatality, it is stealing time from people who could be using it in much more nurturing, nourishing ways that would make people happier. And so, yeah, that's a couple of things I think of.
Thank you so much, Steph. And I love that idea of highlighting how a lot of people don't have a choice in their transportation options and bringing that understanding to conversations. Ashton, we'll turn to you to close it out.
Absolutely. No, I think Jonathan and Steph put it so well. And I will say to this point, I think that conversation is, let's provide space for those who want to choose an alternative to get to work or wherever they're going, or who can't. Because I had this vision in my head as Steph was saying this. I'm like, man, coming out of East County, you going to work down in Central City, and you see Steph in the bike lane, and you're like, oh, what's up? And she's going to work, and you're going to work, right? Like, but she has space to go to work. And that's the piece that I really want to harp on. It's like that space is there, because Jonathan is right. Like, we are fighting for not only a democracy, but a community and a space that we want to live in and be in, a place that we want to be proud of, that we want to continue to be proud of. Let me say that, but also a space we want to pass to our kids, because they are also proud of this place. I can't take my son anywhere else without him turning his nose up and saying, I can't wait to go back to Portland. So anyway.
AJ needs to be writing for the New York Times. That is all I'm saying.
Thank you to our amazing panelists. We have about 20 minutes left for audience questions. So we're gonna start asking some of those. If you haven't added your question to the chat, now's your chance to do so. So our next audience question is from someone who is a wheelchair user. Biking and walking are not options for them. Transit options are limited. So how can Portland accommodate the needs of folks like them, as someone who lives on the west side with no sidewalks?
Y'all want me to go? Is that why? Okay, great.
You were just unmuted, so.
I was already unmuted. Okay, everybody's looking at me. Well, the west side is challenging, right? We already know the West Hills, just because of topography and the way it's situated, it makes it very, very tough for folks to traverse. I've heard, when I was the chair of the Fixing Our Streets Oversight Committee, and we were talking about how we spread that 10-cent dime tax across the city, you would hear the interest out of East Portland, but you couldn't ignore what was going on the West Hills, right? And from my experience and what I've learned, what we need to do is where we can build and make things ADA, we do, but we also need to make sure that, like what we've been talking about, is like, how are we, what's the overall walk shed in that area? Not the walk shed, but necessarily the access. Like, how do you get access to what you're talking about? And that's transit. And I think that is one that is going to take a lot of money, because we're going to need some money. We're going to have to really put, because when I was in the Air Force, this has been my experience. Government always goes with a cheap option because it's government, right? But we can't go for the cheap option any longer, and we can't also not do anything. And so for me, it's one, studying, getting the dollars, and then implementation. What does that look like? I don't live on the West Hills. I can't tell you. And that's a fault of my own. And I would love, the person that asked this question, I would love to find some time to engage and talk about it, because I want to get better clarity and understanding, because I can't go out and advocate and say, well, what are all the things that are necessarily you're going to need in that space? Because again, the big issue, the big hang up in the room is topography, right? It's not a lack of will or more, it's the topography that is holding things up. So I know that probably is not the best answer, but I felt like honesty in this space is more important than trying to get the right answer.
If I can add, yeah, topography, and on the west side, it's huge. Like in 2013, we were looking at, $8 million for West Side and $8 million for East Portland, for sidewalk infill, and $8 million for East Portland was like do, and West Side was like bing, because it costs so much. I think one thing that when we talk about transit, there's fixed transit, but there's also paratransit, and I just paratransit is an unfunded mandate. It is expensive. It takes such a long time. You know, if you have one appointment, that's your day, right? And so I think really looking at how are we working on, you know, and I want to give a shout out to, I think, Phil Sellinger, who's the former board chair of Oregon Walks and worked at TriMet. And so much of what I learned about all of this, I learned from him. So Phil, shout out. It was wonderful to hug you randomly last week, which is another reason you got to love multimodal transit. But I mean, we really need to talk about what is the pedestrian network analysis for transit? How are we making sure that that neighborhoods do connect both to fixed route and that we are fully funding, we are looking to fund paratransit. And I also think that when we are talking about, we need to bring in accessible housing. We do not have accessible housing, and we are looking at, you know, with aging comes a higher probability of disability, and our communities are aging, our region is aging. We are not prepared for that. So it is literally the door to door. How do we build? And I think that there are some opportunities, and I think that we're looking at with residential infill project, you know, how can we advantage and incentivize accessible apartments and accessible homes, and then how do we really look at accessible transit, fixed point and high frequency. I mean, we just need to abundantly fund transit. I don't know what else to say. Just fund it, and um, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Steph and Ashton, for helping highlight some of the challenges and potential paths to go down for solutions. Our next question is, how can participants in the room as citizens divert funding from car-centric projects to active transportation-focused projects? So ideas from our panelists.
Well, I'll just start off by saying, if you're talking Portland specifically, we really don't spend money on car-centric projects in this town for the most part. I mean, pretty much all the money, all the major money we get in, especially from the federal government, which is because we don't have a lot of local revenue, most of our money does come from the feds. That's all for like active transportation related stuff for the most part, notwithstanding I-5 Rose Quarter and other things, but those are kind of outliers. So, so that being said, we have a lot of great examples of that. You know, it's the people power thing, right? It's the people supporting grants. It's the people pushing back against bad projects, that sort of thing. It's also leaning on elected officials to understand those revenue sources and help them see the light about the way they should make their votes and their, you know, when they do their lobbying, and make sure that people are hearing your voice. I mean, that's all. I think that's what I would say to that.
I think there's also a way and opportunity right now, and I'm gonna add to that a little bit, for the jurisdictions here in the region. Well, across the state, you know, ODOT is requesting everybody update their transportation systems plan, their TSPs. And so like, I think that is a real way, one, to start informing local jurisdictions at a very local level. But then two, again, I hate to harp on this regional transportation plan, but this is how we get our federal funding, through that federal menu. And it is approved. It goes through JPAC, obviously, and then is approved by the Metro Council. But what I've learned in my short year of being in this process is, we as Metro don't have any weight or bearing on the jurisdiction's project list. However, citizens who live in their communities and would like to see a better project list roll out from their local jurisdiction, I would urge you to get involved in that planning process. It's early right now. We just passed our last regional transportation plan back in November because we had a federal deadline of December 6th. The next one is due December 2028. And a lot of these local jurisdictions that we're talking about, where we want to see more bike infrastructure, particularly like I would say more in the East County for me, but as we talk about the West Hills and things like that, like these are the kinds of things you want to bring up to your local jurisdiction around planning, so that you are looped in and your voice is heard. Because again, that federal plan that we passed back in November was worth $78 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a lot of money for this region. That's a lot of power. And that's a lot of where the money's at. So if you want to see the streets change, I think that's my approach. I would start organizing in that way in every county.
All right. When we talked earlier about you got a dream at first, I want to share a dream. And that dream is high-speed rail as we have rails to trails projects. I mean, looking at Salmonberry Corridor Trail is one example. It's been over a decade in planning because there's something like, I want to say 26 jurisdictions that it has to go through. It's 86 miles to the coast, 26 jurisdictions. And so that's a reason that it's been really difficult to do. Guess how many, if we did like freeways and high-speed rail, for example, like I don't know if it's a find and replace or a yes and, like how many jurisdictions is that? It's one. There's one jurisdiction. It's U.S. Department of Transportation. So I would love, and it happens to go, a lot of those freeways happen to go to large metropolises that could certainly benefit from high-speed rail. So that is my dream. I would love that would just be such a wonderful game changer. So yes, everyone, please let's get on it.
Thank you all. And our next question is also under this theme of jurisdictions and collaboration. So someone noted we have a Metro Councilor and a City Council candidate on the panel. And in talking about 82nd Avenue and ODOT jurisdiction, just ideas that folks have on how to improve collaboration between government jurisdictions to make the whole process of transportation planning and implementation more effective.
I can go first this time. If Ashton, okay. I think it goes going back to earlier conversation around, what federal and state are funding. I mean, we have such a craving for we have a just transition that we have opted into. We've opted into it through Portland Clean Energy Fund. We have a lot of legislation that's looking at, that we need a just transition to a clean economy. There are so many jobs that are involved in that. And I think talking with ODOT, but also, looking at our congressional delegation and how can we support and advocate for more and better funding from the federal government as well as the state government, specifically tailored to supporting local neighborhoods and developing that multimodal system. And I would say starting with abundant, frequent, just comprehensively lovable transit.
Well, for me, I'm a collaborative leader, and I believe that when you are doing this type of work, you gotta talk past your silos, you gotta talk past your walls, you gotta talk past your agency. We don't do a great job of that, and I'm being very honest around it. We're getting better as leaders, I would say, but there has to be more talk. And I will say, at Metro, we've held a legislative breakfast where we've invited our legislators out to sit and see the scope of responsibility that we have. And I mean, I think it was eye-opening for them. It was a lot of new legislators. They didn't realize, oh snap, Metro has so much responsibility and they meet twice a week. Gosh, it was like, wow, right? And so I think that opening up more space where we are inviting folks to come in and see our work, or bringing folks out to put eyes on it or to present, because I think oftentimes, and I hate, let me tell you this, I'm a boots on the ground person. I love being out in the field, but I hate when we get, all of these presentations about this and that. And I'm like, man, damn the presentation, take me out there and show it to me. Like that's where my mind goes, like so that we can really see the work that we're putting forth, but also I think it's a trust building exercise. I'll share a little bit. I went for a little tour out in Vancouver with Mayor McEnany Ogle. And that's what I'm talking about. We got to be able to reach across government lines because they are also a part of our larger metropolitan region. And I'm riding around with Mary Ann, and she's just showing me, the waterfront, and she's showing me this development and what they're doing with their ARPA dollars. But she came back to the development, and she said, this didn't happen overnight. It may have been built up overnight, but this was 17 years in the making. 17 years. And she's like, now we consider ourselves a bigger part of the metro area. And that's what I mean. Like we have to do the backdoor work of relationship building, trust building, knowing that what the work that we're going out to do is to benefit people. Because if you're in a role like mine and your job isn't to benefit the most people and do the most good for those who don't or without or don't have, then this is the wrong career field for you. If it's about your ego, if it's about whatever policy agenda you want to push, that's fine as long as that policy agenda is about taking care of the people, right? And so that's where I'm at. That's what I feel like a collaboration around government should be, because I learned that in the Air Force, having to collaborate across different agencies. I learned that throughout my entire life. And this is a place where I'm like, well, we're supposed to be doing the good by the citizen. And the only way we're going to do that is through collaborative leadership.
Thank you so much, Ashton. We have time for one, maybe two audience questions. Our next question is about safety projects. So there's so many piecemeal projects, sometimes unfunded, that doesn't create a low stress bike network or reliable transit service because the next piece of that sequence isn't ready yet. So how can we make concrete projects follow these pieces to create a complete safe transportation network?
I would start by saying that I think part of that, the reason that happens is because there's not a lot of money on the table, and you have do-good advocates working hard to do something, to deliver something for people so they get what they can on the ground where they can get it on the ground, because there's not enough money to do everything they want to do. So getting more money always comes back to that. Also, I think that's a reflection of the way politics works. Some of these scopes are made with a sense of, not wanting to rock too many boats in certain places, I think. So you don't see things that might, a project doesn't connect where you think it should reasonably connect because somebody didn't want to go fight that battle over that last strip of parking that they'd have to remove for that project. So we have, separated pieces of infrastructure as a result. I liken it to I think of hiking, and you go across a stream and you have to step from rock to rock and hope that the rocks are stable. That's how our bike network feels sometimes. You get to a nice rock and you're safe, but then there's all this water swirling around you. You're not sure where your next step is going to go. So I think there's, if we had, more money and more willingness to just have a vision on the table and have the kind of people around the table that say, hey, we're not going to compromise on this vision. We're building this whole thing. We would see less of that piecemeal approach.
I would say I agree, and completely. And as you were talking, Jonathan, I was just thinking, it also comes back to what is the nice to have and what is the must haves. And I think of the sign that I hate the most is sidewalk closed. That just, it's just at the end of a thing, it's like sidewalk closed or crossing closed. And what that means is there was enough of an interest in having that sidewalk and there are people walking there. They assume that people are walking there, and then they create a sign. We have invested in a sign that says, and now you can't walk here anymore. We don't know where you're going to go. I have never seen a freeway closed sign. I've never seen one that's just like, well, I don't know where you're gonna go. But and we're laughing about it because it's so ridiculous, right? But like one is ridiculous and one is something that we see all the time in our cities. And so I think that there's just like what is our stress test for uh what is our must have? And I think that we need that framework shift that that walkability and rollability are not a nice to have. They are the fundamental building block. And sidewalk closed, crosswalk closed is not a sign that should we should allow, that should exist. And I think we also like the fabulous reappearing, disappearing bike lane, you know, to Jonathan's point. Like you're like, well, and now I'm in traffic again. You know, there's this trust. We also, to the earlier point of, you know, 122nd, which I have ridden on before, but it's like it shouldn't take bravery to ride on a street in a bike lane. Uh, but and people are like, oh, it doesn't go anywhere. It's like because it's not connected. And so like what we see is like this, it's this network effects of when we start to see these systems overlapping. And I think having that patience, having that vision, and having that fortitude to say, we're willing to take some political hit on some of this infrastructure because we know in a few years when the next project comes, we will be ready. And the last thing I'll mention is I went to one of the most delightful, it was on Outer Gleason. They had done a crosswalk and a sidewalk project, and it was uh, a it was a crossing between a Providence elder place facility and an elementary school. And I remember talking to someone who uh, who was like almost crying. She you know was staying at the elder place and was just like, I get to because I couldn't cross the street. And so I couldn't volunteer more than once a week, but now I can volunteer almost every day. And I was just remembering like people wrote poems about with that ribbon cutting for that crossing and that sidewalk project. And it's like, how much in-kind volunteer support did that elementary school get in just 1 year from that one crosswalk, from that one person who now gets to hang out every day after school on after school reading program? So I think like uh, not saying, you know, identifying what is the must have and the nice to haves, uh, and recognizing just what are the external benefits of when these projects are completed, how much they are loved.
Thank you so much, Steph. And I think that's a great note to end today's panel on. Before we jump, how can folks keep in touch? How can folks follow you and the work you're doing? We'll just go around and hear from the panelists about the best way of staying posted on your work.
Yeah, I'll start us. So you can always reach me at ashton.simpson@oregonmetro.gov. If you want to do that the official way, you can do that. You can also hit me on Instagram and follow me there at AshtonSimpson_Metro. And you can also Google my name and a website for Metro will pop up, and you can also sign up for newsletters. So I like to keep people informed, well informed. So if you got a question or if you a concern, feel free to reach out and email. Open door policy.
I'll go, I guess. Bike Portland everywhere. Pretty easy to find me. And I love when people reach out with news tips or questions. I love hearing that kind of stuff too. And I'm a subscriber mostly based business, so that's how I stay open. So if you're not a subscriber yet, please consider becoming one. So yeah, Bike Portland is where you'll find me on the old blog or any of the social media platforms. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you everyone for being part of this conversation. If you happen to be studying at Portland State University. I'm teaching a few classes next term, so I might see you in class. And I'm also, as someone mentioned in the comments, I'm a candidate for Portland City Council, District 1, East Portland. So you can catch me on www.steph4eastportland.com. And I do occasional newsletters because I'm running for office. So thank you all.
Thank you. And you can keep in touch with Portland for All through our website, through our email updates, and on social media. I'm also popping our donation link in the chat if folks appreciated today's programming and would like to support us continuing to do what we're doing. Thank you to everyone who has stayed with us, who has stayed through this incredible panel. Wish we could have gotten to all of the audience questions. There's so many good ideas and such opportunities to learn from each other and share in this brilliance. I'll release the time so folks can enjoy the last of this beautiful day out. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.